Now, you wouldn't believe me on this, but did you know that there's a country that is militarily more powerful than the United States of America? A nation that has stolen the center stage from all of Europe and is more economically productive than China? Well, Timor Leste ain't any of those, and that's who we're talking about. Ever heard of it? Me neither. Why should you or I care about it? I don't know, it's my channel. I can really do whatever I want. So, East Timor is a country in Southeast Asia. It is also known as Timor Leste, and that's the name I'll be referring to it by. The nation comprises the eastern half of the island of Timor, of which the western half is administered by Indonesia, and including that is the exclave of Oikos on the island's northwestern half, and the minor islands of Atauro and Jako. Australia is the country's southern neighbor, separated by the Timor Sea. The country's size is 14,950 square kilometers, or 5,770 square miles. Delhi, on the north coast of Timor, is its capital and largest city. Now, let's go over the history of Timor Leste, starting from the backstory of pretty much every Asian country, colonialism. Timor Leste was pretty much the ignored middle child of the Portuguese colonies in Asia. It was considered to be all of Timor back then by the Portuguese, and that too only happened after they quote-unquote took over in the 1600s. Then, the west of Timor was taken over by the Dutch by 1652 as part of Dutch Indonesia. After that, being Europeans, they decided on who gets to oppress who in a meeting, and what was left of Timor, the eastern section, became Timor Leste. And that is what the modern day borders are based on, by the way. Serious control by the Europeans, or the Portuguese in this case, was only set up in 1769. And that too was limited because, unlike the Brits, the Portuguese were more, we didn't know we were establishing our cultural dominance over the world, we were just trying to get some of that exotic pussy. But even then, the entire time, Timor was pretty much neglected by Portugal, even by Portuguese colonial standards. During World War II, Delhi, Timor-Leste's capital, was occupied by the Allies, and then the Japanese in 1942. The Timorese and Allies fought the Japanese off with some guerrilla-style fighting. After the war, Portuguese finally decided to try to be a good parent and started development in Timor-Leste from 1950. Before deciding it was too much for them, just like your average Portuguese parent, and basically ditched Timor-Leste for good. After a little bit of infighting on the 28th of November 1975, Timor-Leste was officially independent. This was, however, short-lived, as Indonesia was afraid of a communist revolution taking place in Timor-Leste, because at that point everyone and their mother was. And so they took that as a justification to invade Timor-Leste on 7th December 1975 and declare it Indonesia's 27th province to the world on 17th July 1976. Jesus, the nerve. Yeah, the UN wasn't very happy about that, and of course, being the UN, they took a very difficult, bold, yet necessary choice. Doing absolutely nothing about it, because, they're the United Nations. All they do is pretty much go, can you please not do this? Pretty please? And that too is frankly speaking rare. My rant on the United Nations aside, Indonesia, being a capitalist nation, was obviously undergoing the Red Scare, and decided to unfairly invade Timor-Leste after less than a month since its independence. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think Indonesia probably had its eyes on taking all of Timor for a while. But again, that's just a conspiracy theory on my part, and obviously don't take that as fact after all. Frelimo, the main party in Timor-Leste, raised their own army and resisted the invasion, but that failed, and so they continued guerrilla warfare. But since they were, quote-unquote, the East-East and not the North-South, it didn't succeed. From 1974 to 1999, many atrocities were committed upon the Timorese by the Indonesian forces. While the damage had some varying estimates, because people sadly don't care about what happens to third world countries, many put the number at 102,800, including 18,600 killings and 84,200 dying from illness and starvation. Estimates from Portuguese, Indonesian, and Catholic Church state the number of casualties going as high as 200,000. Yeah, the Catholic Church, which isn't so surprising considering that Timor-Leste's population is 98.3% comprised of Catholics. A massacre in 1991 of 200 demonstrators of the Timorese cause led to an uproar across the nation and led to more international pressure being put on Indonesia. When the old president of Indonesia resigned and the new president, B.J. Habib, came to power in 1998, a referendum within Indonesia and Portugal, supervised by the world's best bank CCTV camera, the UN. The referendum showed a clear support for Timorese independence, which is followed by pro-Timorese integration militia causing a ruckus, being supported by the Indonesian military. In response, the interfet was sent by consent of the Indonesian government to maintain order and peace in Timor-Leste as the independence was underthrown. From 1999, Timor-Leste was handed over to the most negligent foster parents in history, the UN, by the United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor, and Interfed was pulled out in 2000. Timor-Leste's constitution was taken into force in 2002, and thus the nation was officially declared independent. After the 2006 political unrest, the first president of Timor-Leste refused to run for another term, and for the most part, the presidency has been taken over by Jose Ramos Horta. Now, where does Timor-Leste stand on the world stage? Well, not in a very good place. Timor-Leste is the youngest country in Asia and fourth youngest country in the entire world. They've been run over since the very beginning, from the Portuguese colonization to the Indonesian invasion and the conflict for oil with Australia. International cooperation is very important to Timor-Leste. International forces have provided and helped them with both external and internal security. Timor-Leste has also relied extensively on donor funds, even to this day. Even with the oil money rolling in, it's still gonna be a while. Timor-Leste's current goal economically is to work in coordination with Australia and use the oil income to develop their own nation. Timor-Leste gets active donor funds from Australia, Portugal, Germany and Japan, and this has been happening because Timor-Leste has shown itself to be a transparent nation and justified in the way it uses its donor funds to develop itself. If Timor-Leste wants to grow itself more, it has to rely more on its oil reserves, and it's definitely on the right path. As politically, the nation plans to maintain and develop good relationships with Indonesia and Australia. Despite historical and recent tensions, China has also been helping developing infrastructure in Delhi, and Timor-Leste is cooperating with the USA, Australia and Portugal militarily because, there's that sweet oil. Overall, Timor-Leste is a very young nation. They are open and transparent with the way they're doing things. Timor-Leste has great potential for becoming a successful nation, but a huge part of it is heavily reliant on their international relations and what the big two, China and US, have to say, as is most nations' futures to some degree. I'm low-key hyped to see what happens of Timor-Leste in the future, because it'd be really interesting to see. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. Now, I must admit that I haven't covered everything cool about Timor-Leste. The whole fight with Australia is something to cover on its own, and there's some other cool things to talk about Timor-Leste too. Will I make a part 2 on Timor-Leste? Most probably, yeah. I really enjoyed researching for this video and got to learn a lot. On top of that, I definitely do want to talk about similar countries. Countries that are relatively not discussed on the global stage as much. So do let me know if y'all like this video and want me to follow a similar style. Anyways, I'm out. Peace.